are these people?
Um, so I'm kind of surprised. I'm not really, but still kind of surprised. This issue did not take off as much as it probably should have. Oh, at least I felt like it should have, there should have been more conversation around this, over the weekend. Um, so here's what happened. So there's a tweet regarding Lord Balfour's portrait at
Oh.
Trinity College in Cambridge in the UK, basically getting destroyed. And of course, everybody was up in arms, especially the Zionists, basically being like, "How dare you?" Like blah blah blah, whatever. So me, obviously, being the curious little man I am, I was like, okay, so obviously there has to be some significance to this because I didn't necessarily know the history. Obviously, I know of Lord Balfour given I grew up in the UK, but learning more about the significance of the declaration that he wrote and his ties to Israel, and then like obviously, which people argue he essentially is the father of the shit that is happening in Israel and Gaza right now and has been happening, I would argue since the turn of the last century. I'm kind of surprised this hasn't gotten more discussion online as I think it should. But we're going to do that tonight, as we do sometimes. We teach you guys some shit.
Yep.
So this is going to be a short article, and it's going to be mostly video clips I pulled.
Yep.
It's from the MediaLine. This is a new one that I just happened to find. This article is written by Steve Ganot, who writes, "Activist destroys Balfour portrait at Cambridge in protest over Israel." So he writes, at Cambridge University last Friday, a pro-Palestinian activist destroyed a portrait of Alfred Balfour, the British statesman and conservative prime minister who, as foreign minister in 1917, declared the British government's support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The activist associated with Palestine Action sprayed red paint on the life-size portrait before slashing it with a knife. The incident is one of many recent protests linked to the Israeli-Hamas war. So here's the clip. So this is what went viral over the weekend. So if you want to play it.
Yep. If I do this and this, let's go.
So obviously, the Zionists were up in arms over that. And we'll get to we'll talk more about that later. But the Balfour Declaration, issued during the decline of Ottoman rule and when Britain was a significant global power, has been contentious, with Palestinians demanding an apology from Britain for what they see as the start of their displacement. The declaration led to British mandatory rule in Palestine, eventually culminating in the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 and a Middle Eastern war that the displacement of more than 700,000 Palestinians. No. Forward. No.
There you go.
There we go. The Palestine Action Group argues that the Balfour Declaration initiated the ethnic cleansing of Palestine by promising land that, in the group's view, Britain had no right to give. The act of vandalism at Cambridge comes at a time when Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has called for stricter policing of protests and rising hate speech and threatening behavior, particularly in demonstrations related to the Gaza Strip conflict. Sunak emphasized the right to protest, but rejected using it to justify support for Hamas, which the UK considers a terrorist organization. Cambridge Trinity College expressed regret over the vandalism, offering support to college members affected by the incident. Oh, whatever. I'm sure that was probably like, no, wouldn't say a fake, but like a duplicate. I'm sure they'll be able to replace it.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as
they'll still call it genocidal.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Why did they genocide that duplicate painting?
So you brought this.
So I brought this. This is from TRT World. So
right.
let's get into
testosterone replacement therapy world.
So let's get into the history a little bit. So obviously, as I said, I didn't know too much about this until I did some of the research over the weekend. But let's dive a little deeper because, as we said, we want to teach you guys something here.
Cool.
So let's find out a little bit more about the Balfour Declaration and why it's problematic. So we can
Roll the
start
beam
with this
footage.
one.
We are proud of the role that we played in the creation of the State of Israel, and we will certainly mark the centenary with pride.
This was what Theresa May had to say about the 100-year anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. But what exactly happened on November 2nd, 1917? And what was the Balfour
Wait,
Declaration
1917? That's before October 7th, Colin. That's before then.
Yes.
all about?
A little bit.
These 68 words were a historic promise given to the early Zionist movement by the British government for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Sir Arthur Balfour, then Foreign Secretary of Britain, wrote in a public letter to a famous British Zionist, Lord Walter Rothschild, which read,
His Majesty's government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country.
This was just what the Zionists were looking for, as outlined in the First Zionist Congress during its meeting in Basel, Switzerland in 1897. Zionism seeks to establish a home for the Jewish people in Palestine secured under public law. Earlier, Theodor Herzl, their founder, had failed to realize this purpose when he couldn't get support from the Ottomans or any other European ruler. But this declaration basically laid out the foundation for the State of Israel. And since the second part of the agreement, where it talks about protecting the civil and religious rights for non-Jewish communities in Palestine, was never implemented, it resulted in a great injustice towards the Palestinian people, as thousands of them lost their homeland with the creation of this new Jewish state, and the ones who remained are being treated like second-class citizens. I think the late British author and journalist Arthur Koester summed it up best when he said, "One nation solemnly promised to another nation the country of a third." What were they thinking? Well, you see, Great Britain was in the midst of World War I, and one of its biggest foes was the Ottoman Empire. So they employed the tried and tested strategy of divide and conquer. They were giving the Arabs the promise of complete and final liberation in return for rebellion against the Ottoman rulers. The Crown had decided Palestine's for the Jews, thus ensuring a perpetually divided Middle East. And 31 years after the Balfour Declaration, the State of Israel was founded. But it's not 100% certain that this was the initial goal of the British government. The results have brought devastating consequences to the Middle East. It paved the way for the longest military occupation in recent history and destabilized an entire region. So should the UK government be proud of this landmark letter? Or should they come to terms with the reality of what it's done?
Okay.
Any thoughts? I have a couple, but any thoughts before I move on to the second clip? It will kind of give more.
I mean,
a
it
little
sounds
deeper
like
into that.
Europe trying to placate the Rothschilds again.
Mhm.
Yep.
Nice that they're included.
Right,
So-
but there will also, but this is what I didn't know until doing the research. The British also tried to placate the Arabs as well,
Yes.
because they basically so the British tried to play the Zionists. We'll get more into that in the next clip. They also tried to play into the Arabs in terms of promising essentially Palestine to them,
Yeah.
if in support of getting rid of the Ottomans. And then the French were also involved because they own kind of parts of the Middle East at that time. So
Yeah.
so basically it was just a whole mess, in essentially the British trying to beat the Ottomans, that they basically said to one group, we'll do this, we'll promise you this land, and then another group, we'll promise you this land, and then the French they were trying to be allyship with. So basically it was just a mess, like, finally. But one thing about the declaration that I think people might have noticed, like, which the declaration itself was vague as fuck, because and I should have pulled it separately, but it said Palestine should be a national home for the Jews. It never said anything about being the national home. There's a big difference. So it implies that it could be one, to me, or how I interpret it, like one of many.
Yeah.
So it didn't necessarily have to be Palestine per se. Again, as we know, and we've talked about on the show, you know, East Africa was considered to be the national home for the Jewish people, as was Argentina, was also considered.
And I think there was a
as
spot
well.
in Russia too, right? If I'm not
Yes.
mistaken.
So, right. So it didn't necessarily have to be Palestine per se, but obviously the Zionists wanted it given, you know, spiritual implications. But, you know, but essentially, like, and I would argue that this declaration would have been more, to me, opinion versus, like, this was just one person's point of view in terms of versus having, like, you know, a group of people collectively making this decision, like in government or something like that. So, Rob, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Basically, the way that this whole Zionist operation started was to, like the video showed, is to kind of destabilize the Ottoman Empire during World War I. But then the CIA eventually got involved with MI6, meaning like British and American intelligence all got together in the late 40s and decided that its function was to keep doing what it was doing, which is to keep the Middle East basically destabilized as its function. And all the religious stuff where this is the promised land, we're going to send you guys back to your homeland. That's all just setting the groundwork for getting a bunch of people to go over there and create this flotilla, this outpost of the US that is basically just keeping Middle Eastern countries from uniting and kicking the US out, protecting their natural resources and stuff like that. So its function was exactly what the video said in World War I, and then eventually all of the Israeli intelligence, MI6, and the US all started working together to basically just create this Western outpost that's whole function is to be there to destabilize. And that's what it's doing to this day. They're not just doing what they're doing in Gaza. They're bombing Lebanon. They're bombing Syria. They are there to destabilize and keep the Arab nations from uniting. But they're actually kind of failing at that at the moment, because they're actually uniting a lot of countries that previously had beefs with each other, because they all are agreeing that Israel is actually the bigger threat than each other. So in a way, they're actually like they're really kind of failing themselves right now, and it's a good thing. I'm glad to see this whole operation kind of fall apart at the seams. But yeah, it does seem like a bunch of, basically not even a bunch, a few rich white guys in Britain decided that this is just something that they wanted to do, and so they signed a letter. Rothschilds were involved, and Bob's your uncle. Here we are, 100 and some odd years later.
Yeah.
Well,
all right.
You brought this clip.
I want to. So after looking at that clip again, Reef knows me well. I kind of ask more questions. So my next question after that was, okay, so what was Balfour's connection to Zionists then? Like, why was he willing to write this letter? Essentially kind of basically giving Palestine away. So this clip is from Imperial War Museum. There's going to be a lot of artifacts of this show. Don't care about that. Like, you care about it, but like, that's not really the focus here. So we're going to play like the second half. of the clip, but it will kind of go into more of how the Zionists got involved to where Balfour was willing to write this declaration in the first place. So you can go ahead, Reef.
Having already made commitments to Arab nationalists and the French government, in November 1917, the British made one more promise regarding the land in Palestine, this time to Zionists seeking to set up a national Jewish state. Zionism was a social movement that began in the 1800s. It was founded on the belief that Judaism was not only a religion, but a nationality, and that Jewish people deserved a state like British or French people did. Due to historical and religious ties to the region, Palestine became the desired location for this future Jewish state.
So this armband, or brassard, was worn by a Palestinian Jewish volunteer with British forces serving in that area of the Middle East during 1918. Interestingly, there were 3 battalions of Jewish volunteers, 1 battalion of British, 1 of Americans, and 1 of Palestinian Jews. The British volunteers weren't really interested in Zionism at all. They were more interested in using that military service to the Crown, to assimilate into British society. It was really the American volunteers and the local Jewish volunteers from Palestine who were really fired up by Zionism and wanted to use this to defeat the Ottoman Empire and secure that Jewish homeland. So what this object shows us, and the story behind it, is that although Zionism was a popular movement, the majority of Jews were not Zionists and didn't want to move to Palestine.
Jewish immigration to Palestine had been slowly increasing throughout the 1900s, mainly fueled by brutal anti-Semitism and terrible pogroms in Russia. By 1914, the Jews in Palestine numbered around 60,000, or 8% of the population. But for the British, it was Zionists elsewhere that they were concerned with. In an effort to win the support of Jewish communities in both Allied countries like the United States and enemy countries like Austria-Hungary, the UK Foreign Secretary signed the Balfour Declaration, vowing to set up a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
So the Balfour Declaration is signed in late 1917, in fact just after Allenby's victory at the Third Battle of Gaza. And this map shows the situation just before that battle, and it shows the confidence that the British have that they are going to win the war in the Middle East. Because let's face it, on this map, they haven't taken all of this territory yet, but they're already looking at the post-war settlement in this area. There are people within the British cabinet, Prime Minister Lloyd George is one of them, who thinks that having a Jewish homeland in Palestine is the right thing to do, but it's also politically expedient. The British and French war efforts by this time are pretty much under pressure. There's a manpower crisis, there's a crisis in raw materials. The Americans have joined the war in April 1917, and we really need the Americans to ramp up and get stuck into the war effort. So the idea is by supporting this Zionist idea, it will get Jewish financiers and industrialists in America on side, and they will put big pressure on the American government to keep them involved in the First World War and fight for the Allied cause. And this is an anti-Semitic idea that the Jews control world finance and business across capitalist countries. And that idea takes hold and is one of the reasons we think they can put pressure on the American government.
The declaration was vague. It said that the homeland would be in Palestine, but didn't say where. It also vowed to protect civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities, but made no mention of their political rights. For the British, these conflicting promises were worth making to assure that they came out on top in the world's first total war. And they were effective. Britain and France were victorious over the Central Powers in 1918. But now that the war was at an end, the British would have to face the consequences. The choices they made would help to spark a century of conflict. Having captured Damascus in 1918, the British military left Faisal and his men in charge of a military occupation zone, an area that Faisal declared the Arab Kingdom of Syria. However, the French were not happy. Hoping to maintain their influence in the region, they expelled Faisal in a short war. It was a crushing blow to the pan-Arab cause. Instead, it was the victorious Allied powers who drew the new borders of the Middle East in a series of conferences from 1919 to 1923. With the formation of the League of Nations, Britain and France took control under a series of mandates. These were intended to prepare the local populations for independence. Initially, France was given the mandates for Syria and Lebanon, while Britain was given the mandates for Mesopotamia and Palestine. But after Faisal's defeat, the British decided to split Palestine in two. Faisal was given the crown of Mesopotamia, and his brother Abdullah was given the crown of the newly created Transjordan. The remainder of Palestine would be strictly British.
So this 1924 map shows the Palestine that came into being after the First World War. It is not part of a pan-Arab state. In fact, there is no pan-Arab state in this region. Also, it is not an internationally controlled area or an area in which the French have any control at all. It is a British-administered League of Nations mandate. What this mandate of Palestine does have, however, written into its statute, is the Balfour Declaration of a home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
Jewish immigration to mandatory Palestine continued to grow. By 1931, there were 176,000 Jewish people living there, making up 17% of the population. This led to increased tensions, riots, and violence between the new arrivals and local Arabs who, along with existing Christian populations, were starting to see themselves not only as Arabs, but as distinctly Palestinian people.
What these new Jewish settlers bring in is lots of financial backing, and they start to buy up more and more land. So it's more the fertile agricultural land of Palestine, which actually makes the Jewish population increasingly economically dominant in the area. The British government gets very, very worried about this. In 1930, the Colonial Secretary puts forward a white paper to drastically limit Jewish immigration into the Palestine Mandate. The following year, 1931, pressure from Zionists within the British government and also world Zionist leaders talked Ramsay MacDonald into dropping the white paper. And from that moment, there is no limit on Jewish immigration into Palestine.
This reversal coincided with events elsewhere that would supercharge the conflict. In 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany and began instituting a wave of anti-Semitic policies. This sent shockwaves through the Jewish communities of Europe. However, for those seeking to flee, options were few, with most governments maintaining strict limits on Jewish immigration. For many Jews, Zionist or not, travelling to Palestine became the only option. By 1936, the Jewish contingent inside mandatory Palestine had doubled to 28% of the population. Now tensions began to escalate at an alarming rate. What began as a general strike among Palestinian Arabs in 1936 devolved into violent attacks on Jewish settlements and British military installations. This event became known as the Great Revolt.
From this point, really, you can see Palestinian Arab nationalism as opposed to pan-Arab nationalism. They're fighting against an issue, that Jewish homeland and British control in the region, that no other mandate or any other has to fight against. And they want their own Palestinian state, an independent country, free from British control.
The British response was to crush the revolt as quickly as possible with overwhelming strength. They brought a surge of new troops, more men than were serving in India at the time, and declared martial law in 1937. Favouring tactics of collective punishment, they destroyed homes and burned villages to the ground. They used aerial bombing even on urban areas and arrested, killed or exiled Arab leaders, fracturing their movement.
In addition, the British use Jewish auxiliary units to fight the Arabs during the revolt. But this is a real turnaround from 1921, when they disband the Jewish Legion. Now, in 1936-37, the British are so overstretched that they really don't care. They just need boots on the ground to sort this situation out and to end this revolt as quickly as possible. So by the end of the Arab revolt, 17% of the Arab male population are either killed, wounded, imprisoned or exiled. This really weakens the Arab cause in Palestine, just at the moment when the Jewish population is getting more and more power.
Well,
So basically, money.
yep. As always, and trying to keep us
As
in
always.
war.
Trying to keep us in war, but it was a way for the British to ensure their victory against the Ottomans, that essentially that they needed Zionists from the States in order to help financially back them, in essentially to help them win the war. So basically in exchange, it's like, we'll give you this if you help us out. So yeah, so the idea again, you know, that people are saying this happened since October 7th. No, you can
It's
argue
been
even
happening.
like it's been happening since the turn of the century, to be quite honest. So
Yeah.
like, you know, with all of this stuff is in place. So hence, this is why Balfour's portrait got destroyed in Cambridge, so he can get fucked. But he can especially get fucked because I found this from another YouTube video, I forgot where. I just pulled the screenshot of it. But I'm sure Balfour said this shortly after, you know, the declaration, where he says, "In Palestine, we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country. The four great powers," so that's Britain, France, America, and the Soviet Union, "are committed to Zionism. And Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-long traditions, in present needs, in future hopes, of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land." So basically Balfour basically said, fuck the Arabs, the Zionists got this. So, I mean, what else does it say? It's just like a stereotypical imperialist who sold out the Arabs to gain control over an area of the world that essentially the British had no right to. And they essentially gave it away to Zionists for money.
Well, anything to finish up with, Rob, before we head to our last story for you, probably?
Yeah, I might miss the last story about the pier, so I'm gonna just comment on that right now because it is pertinent to what we're talking about right now. Israel's function right now, and a lot of the motivation behind what they're actually doing in Gaza right now, while it is ideological, it is also monetary, financial. So what they're actually trying to do, and my theory, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, is that they're going to try to finish up the Ben Gurion Canal, which goes through northern Gaza.
We talked about it, Reef, right?
Yep.
Good moment.
The Ben Gurion Canal, for people that don't know, is it's right next to the Suez Canal, which is in Egypt. So the idea is that Israel wants to become players when it comes to maritime trade routes, and they want to create a competitor to the Suez Canal, which goes right through northern Gaza. And some of the original plans for this were to detonate 50 to 100 nuclear bombs to actually create the canal.
Yep.
Yeah, it's crazy. So like they're actually
idea,
pretty close to getting it done. And if you're asking yourself what the cherry on top for the Zionists are monetarily for this, it's not just the creation of this canal, which is going to make them billions of dollars, and it will effectively make them it'll sort of make them maritime superstars as long as until Yemen stops blocking the Bab el-Mandeb Canal south of that. But that's neither here nor there. The other thing is that they have $600 billion worth of liquefied natural gas off of the coast of Gaza, which they also want to have access to. So the pier, my theory is, and I think everyone can agree this is an option at least, is that pier that they're going to build for humanitarian purposes is likely going to start out being some sort of like, they'll spin it as it's some sort of we're only going to put it in it's going to be there for a couple of days or a couple of months or a couple of years, but then it'll actually turn into a hub for stealing all the liquefied natural gas off of the coast of Gaza and then transporting it from this pier, which will likely become a dock or some sort of place where they can actually pump the liquefied natural gas, and then they'll run it right through the Ben Gurion Canal into the Red Sea. So we're going to see, I think that pier is likely some sort of like, they're laying the groundwork for actually stealing all of the Palestinians' liquefied natural gas resources.
I mean, Reef, didn't I say on Twitter, and I tagged you, like when they mentioned about this port, I was like, sounds like they're trying to build the Ben Gurion Canal to me. And again, we talked about the Ben Gurion Canal extensively here. So it makes complete sense, that all of this is motivated by money. All of this is motivated by ripping Palestine off of their natural resources to the displacement and genocide of people who have been living there somewhat peacefully for centuries. And that's what mainstream media is not going to tell you. And that's why, again, going back to our original segment, we're going to be in trouble because we actually do report on this stuff and we have a reason to report on this stuff, and the Zionists are not going to like it.
Which is why they demonetize us, which, speaking of monies, you can give it to us this way at co-v.com/Indie News Network. Just scan that QR code. If you're in the live chat, you can put !donate and it'll give you that link. Fun stuff may happen if you do that. So, also, if you can't give us monies, do some of this, like and subscribe, share, leave a comment, help us get to 2K. We're getting there. Let us know what number you got.